Cops discover bodies in a woman's truck during a traffic stop. It started as a routine traffic stop on a quiet stretch of highway. Two officers, expecting nothing more than a warning or a citation, instead uncovered a nightmare. When the woman rolled down her window, she appeared calm, too calm. Her hands trembled slightly, her eyes darting between the rearview mirror and the dashboard. Something wasn't right. And when one officer walked to the back of her truck, drawn by a faint, unfamiliar smell, what he found inside would leave the entire department shaken. Because that night, what began as a simple stop for a broken taillight turned into one of the most disturbing discoveries the town had ever seen. The woman behind the wheel was 36-year-old Elena Brooks, a name that, until that night, meant almost nothing to anyone outside the small town of Brookdale. She wasn't famous. She wasn't notorious. She was just another face among thousands, the woman who poured your coffee at the diner, who smiled politely but never talked much, who kept to herself and always left before anyone could ask too many questions. To most people in Brookdale, Elena was invisible, a quiet shadow moving through ordinary life. She worked the graveyard shift at Miller's Diner, a worn-out little place by the highway that smelled of burnt toast and cheap coffee. Locals stopped by after their late shifts, truckers rolled in for midnight breakfasts, and high school kids sneaked in after curfew. Elena was always there behind the counter, the woman in the faded blue apron, hair tied back, eyes tired but kind. She never complained, never flirted with the regulars, never joined the gossip that spilled between cups of steaming coffee. If you asked anyone in town about her, they'd all say the same thing. Elena? She's quiet. Sweet, I guess. Keeps to herself. But in truth, no one really knew her. She lived alone in a small, weather-beaten house on the outskirts of town, down a gravel road that wound through the woods. The mailbox was rusted, the fence half collapsed, the porch light always flickering. Most nights, her only company was the distant hum of passing cars and the soft hiss of her old radio. She never hosted guests. She never went out. The curtains were always drawn. Sometimes neighbors said they'd hear faint noises coming from the house, muffled arguments, footsteps on the porch long after midnight, or the sound of glass breaking. But by the time anyone thought to check, the noise would stop, and the house would go still again. No one ever asked questions. Brookdale was the kind of town that minded its own business. For years, Elena lived this way, working long hours, walking home alone after closing, her life blending into the monotony of the town's nightly rhythm. But under that fragile stillness, something had been festering, a history she'd tried to bury, a pain that never truly left her. Before Brookdale, there had been another town, another home, another life. Elena grew up in the South, a small rural community where everyone knew each other's secrets. Her father had been a truck driver, gone for weeks at a time. Her mother worked double shifts at a nursing home. Elena, the middle child of three, had learned early to fend for herself. By 16, she was quiet, withdrawn, a girl who smiled on the outside but lived in constant fear of the tempers that boiled behind closed doors. Her father drank a lot, and when he did, he hit. Neighbors knew it, teachers suspected it. But in a place like that, you didn't call the cops. You prayed, you endured, and you hoped next time wouldn't be as bad. When she was 18, Elena left home with nothing but a duffel bag and $100 she'd saved from waiting tables. She drifted for years, from one small town to another, one diner to the next. She changed her number often, avoided social media, and never stayed long enough for anyone to really know her. Until Brookdale. It was supposed to be a fresh start, quiet, anonymous, safe. And for a while it was. Until he came back. His name was Ray Dalton, a man from her past. Someone she'd met years ago when she worked at a roadside cafe 2 towns over. He was charming back then, or at least he knew how to pretend. He'd come in every night for pie and coffee, leaving big tips, smiling in that disarming way that made you believe he was good. But Ray was not good. He was controlling, jealous, and violent when he didn't get his way. Their relationship started like most abusive ones do, small manipulations disguised as care. Don't talk to him, he's flirting with you. You don't need to work late, I'll take care of you. You know I only get angry because I love you. By the time Elena realized what was happening, it was too late. He'd isolated her from her friends, tracked her every move, and turned her world into a cage. When she finally gathered the courage to leave, he didn't let her go quietly. There were threats, bruises, and promises that if she ever tried to run again, he'd make her regret it. But Elena ran anyway. She moved to Brookdale, changed her last name, and started over. For nearly 3 years, she thought she was free. She built a fragile peace for herself, even if it was lonely. Then about 2 months before the traffic stop, Ray found her again. No one knows exactly how. Maybe a mutual acquaintance mentioned her name, or maybe he'd never really stopped looking. But one night, he showed up at Miller's Diner, sitting at the far booth near the window. He didn't order anything. He just stared at her. Elena froze when she saw him. The plate she was holding slipped from her hand and shattered. Her manager came running, but she told him she just felt dizzy. She didn't sleep that night. From that moment on, things changed. She started missing shifts. Her coworkers noticed the dark circles under her eyes. She jumped at every sudden noise. One waitress, a young woman named Carla, tried to reach out, offered to walk her home, asked if everything was okay. Elena just smiled and said she was fine. But she wasn't fine. Ray had started calling again, showing up outside her house, leaving notes on her porch that read, "We need to talk." One night, she found her back door open, the latch broken. Nothing was stolen, but she felt the unmistakable presence of someone who'd been there. She told no one. And then one evening, 2 men came to her house. Ray and his friend. The same friend who'd helped him move furniture years ago, a large, intimidating man named Mason. They said they just wanted to talk. That night would end in screams the neighbors didn't hear, and a silence that would carry into the following morning. But none of that was known to the officers who pulled her over that night. That night, the night of the traffic stop, the air was thick with mist, the kind that turns headlights into hazy halos. Deputy Carter and Officer Nguyen had been patrolling for nearly 6 hours, driving the same stretch of highway between Brookdale and the next town over. It was a long, quiet shift, the kind where conversation dies out after the first few hours, replaced by static from the radio and the hum of the tires on asphalt. Carter, the senior of the two, was in his early 40s, calm, measured, the kind of man who'd seen enough of life to know not to take anything for granted. Nguyen was younger, just 3 years on the force, eager and sharp-eyed. They made a good team, one cautious, the other curious. It was close to midnight when they spotted the pickup truck. The dark, older model Ford creeping along the edge of the lane, its right tail light flickering. Carter noticed it first. "Tail lights out," he said, tapping the dashboard. "Wang no dat? Looks like she's drifting a bit too. Let's check it out. Could be a DUI." They flipped on the lights, and the truck slowed immediately. No chase, no hesitation. Just a simple pullover. At first glance, everything seemed normal. The driver's silhouette sat still, hands gripping the wheel. The engine idled low. Carter approached on the driver's side. Nguyen circled toward the rear. Inside, the faint smell of air freshener mixed with something else, something metallic, faint, but wrong. Elena rolled down the window. Her face was pale, almost gray under the dashboard light. Her eyes were sunken, her lips trembling. She tried to smile but couldn't quite manage it. "Evening, ma'am," Carter said calmly. "You know why we pulled you over?" She nodded, voice quiet. "The light. I think it went out." "License and registration, please." Her hands shook as she opened her purse. Papers fluttered, coins spilled. She muttered an apology, trying to gather them. "Take your time," Carter said. But he noticed something, the way she avoided eye contact, the tension in her shoulders. He glanced back toward Nguyen, who was inspecting the rear of the vehicle. Nguyen lifted his flashlight and motioned slightly, a small, subtle gesture that meant something's off. Nguyen had noticed the tailgate wasn't latched properly, and from the small gap, a faint but unmistakable odor seeped out, one that didn't belong on any vehicle. Carter stepped back, scanning the interior again. The truck was messy. Blankets piled up in the passenger seat, fast food wrappers, and what looked like dried mud across the floorboards. But what really caught his attention was the streak of something dark, faint but visible, along the edge of the seat. He leaned closer. "Ma'am, have you been in an accident?" Elena froze. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. "No, it's paint," she whispered. "Just paint." Carter didn't believe her. Nguyen approached from the back. "Sir," he said quietly, "you might want to take a look at this." And that was the moment that would divide the night in two, before and after. Before, it was just a broken taillight. After, it would be the story the whole state couldn't stop talking about. Behind that dusty tailgate, hidden beneath 2 layers of tarp and plastic, lay something unspeakable. But the discovery hadn't happened yet. Not officially. At that moment, Elena still sat in her truck, eyes glassy, knuckles white on the steering wheel, breathing in short, shallow bursts. She knew what they were about to find. She knew it was over. And as Carter took one cautious step toward the back, the world she'd tried so hard to control, the years of fear, the silence, the running, all came crashing down in a single heartbeat. In the distance, a semi passed, its headlights flashing briefly across the side of the truck, illuminating the streaks of dirt and dust and the faint outline of something large and lumpy under the tarp in the bed. Carter's stomach tightened. He motioned for Nguyen to lift it. But before he could, Elena spoke. Her voice was so soft, it almost disappeared into the night. "You don't want to open that," she said. Wang Frode. Carter turned to her. "What did you say?" Her eyes filled with tears. "I tried to stop it," she whispered. "I didn't mean to, but I couldn't stop it." And with that, she dropped her head into her hands and began to sob, not like someone afraid of being caught, but like someone who'd been carrying a secret for far too long. Carter radioed for backup. Nguyen opened the tailgate. And what they saw inside would haunt them for the rest of their lives. But that was later, part of the horror that would unfold piece by piece in the investigation. For now, the story of Elena Brooks, the quiet woman at the diner, the polite smile, the invisible neighbor, was no longer invisible. She was the woman behind the wheel. The woman who ran from her past. And the woman whose secret had finally caught up to her on a foggy highway just outside Brookdale. She had spent years trying to disappear. That night, the world finally saw her. And what they saw would change everything. When Deputy Carter stepped out of the patrol car, the night air hit him like a wall, damp, cold, and unusually still for a Friday evening. The fog was heavy, stretching across the empty highway like a thin white curtain. The only sounds were the hum of cicadas in the nearby woods and the low rumble of engines passing miles away. The truck he'd just pulled over idled quietly by the roadside, exhaust smoke curling upward into the mist. The taillight was shattered, glass glinting under the beam of his flashlight. Carter adjusted his duty belt, walked toward the driver's side window, and gave the familiar 3 taps on the glass. Inside, the driver moved slowly, too slowly. When the window rolled down, he met the uneasy eyes of a woman. Her hair was pulled into a messy ponytail, strands sticking to her face with sweat despite the cool air. Her breathing was shallow. Her hands, small trembling, gripped the steering wheel tight enough for her knuckles to turn white. "Evenin', ma'am," Carter said, his tone calm, steady, the way years on the job had trained him. "You know why I stopped you tonight?" The woman swallowed hard before answering. The light? The taillight? That's right, Carter said, offering a reassuring nod. License and registration, please. That was when he noticed it. Her hesitation wasn't the kind that came from a misplaced wallet. It was something deeper, a fear she couldn't hide. Her fingers fumbled through her purse, searching, shuffling, pausing, starting again. Her breath came faster now. Take your time, Carter said softly, but his instincts, that old, familiar prickle in the back of his neck, told him something wasn't right. Nguyen, his partner, had stepped out of the cruiser and was circling to the rear of the vehicle. He always checked the back first, a habit from his early years on patrol. The truck bed was covered with a weathered tarp, edges tied down loosely. He shined his flashlight around the tailgate, noting scuff marks, scratches, and what looked like dark stains on the bumper. Then it hit him. A smell. It came faintly at first, something strange, sour, heavy in the damp air. It wasn't gasoline or oil. It was metallic, almost like rust, but not quite. The kind of scent that made your stomach twist before your brain could name it. Hey, Nguyen called out, his voice sharp, carrying over the stillness. Carter, you smell that? Carter paused mid-sentence, looking up from the window. The woman froze. He sniffed once, and his blood ran cold. He'd smelled it before. At accident scenes. At homicide calls. In the morgue. It was the scent of blood. Ma'am, Carter said, his voice lowering, his tone suddenly more authoritative. I need you to step out of the vehicle. Her eyes widened. She clutched her purse tighter. Did I do something wrong? Just step out, please, Carter repeated. He didn't raise his weapon. Not yet. But his hand hovered near the holster. Years of experience told him this wasn't just nerves, this was fear. The kind that comes from guilt. Nguyen moved to the passenger side, motioning for Carter to keep her talking while he checked the back. He grabbed the edge of the tarp and pulled it slightly. It stuck for a moment, the rope damp and tight from the humidity. When it finally gave, the stench grew stronger, thick, suffocating. He coughed, covering his mouth with his sleeve. Jesus, he muttered. Carter saw his partner's face change, a look of shock, confusion, and something close to dread. What is it? Carter asked, taking a few steps closer. Nguyen didn't answer immediately. His flashlight beam trembled as he lifted the tarp higher. Beneath it were two large black plastic bags, duct-taped at the top, crumpled unevenly as if whatever was inside had shifted during the drive. One of the bags had a small tear along its side. Nguyen leaned in closer. That's when he saw it, a glimpse of pale skin pressing through the opening. Fingers. Stiff. Motionless. His throat tightened. Carter, he said quietly, eyes wide. You need to see this. Carter walked over slowly, his boots crunching over gravel. He leaned in, shining his flashlight down into the truck bed. The beam caught the torn plastic, the cold skin beneath it, the unmistakable shape of a human hand. He didn't move for a full 3 seconds, just stared. Then his training took over. Ma'am, step out of the vehicle. Now. His voice was firm, commanding. Elena, the woman, didn't move. She just sat there, her eyes wide, her breathing ragged. Then slowly she reached for the door handle. Her hands shook violently. Carter motioned for Nguyen to keep his weapon ready. Hands where I can see them, he ordered. Elena stepped out of the truck, the gravel crunching under her worn boots. She was small, almost frail, wearing a denim jacket that hung loosely from her shoulders. Her eyes glistened with tears she hadn't yet allowed to fall. Carter guided her to the front of the vehicle. What's in the back, Elena? He asked. She didn't answer. Her lips moved slightly, whispering something, a name maybe, but the words were too faint to catch. Nguyen stepped back, his radio already in his hand. Dispatch, we need immediate backup, he said, his voice tight. possible homicide. 2 bodies confirmed in the back of a black Ford pickup, requesting forensics, medical, and units for containment. Static crackled back. Copy that, Unit 12. Backup en route. Carter handcuffed Elena gently, reading her rights as she trembled under his grip. She didn't resist. She didn't even blink. It was as if she'd already accepted everything that was about to happen. By the time additional patrol units arrived, the scene was a chaos of flashing lights and muted shock. Officers moved quickly, securing the area with yellow tape, photographers documenting every inch of the truck. Reporters would later say that even the seasoned officers on the scene that night walked away pale. The coroner arrived just before dawn. When they opened the bags under the harsh white glare of portable lights, 2 men's bodies were revealed, both in their late 30s, both showing signs of blunt force trauma. The smell was overwhelming. One of the officers turned away to vomit behind the truck. Another whispered, "My God," under his breath. Elena stood beside a cruiser, head bowed, wrists cuffed, staring at the ground. She hadn't said a word since being read her rights. Carter approached her again, crouching slightly to meet her eyes. "Elena," he said quietly, "who are they?" She looked up at him for the first time. Her eyes were empty, not wild, not angry, just hollow. "You'll find out soon," she whispered. Carter's jaw tightened. He'd seen killers break down, cry, beg, scream. But this cold acceptance was different. It was haunting. Forensics later confirmed what Carter and Nguyen had suspected. Both victims had been dead for at least 3 days. There were traces of blood in the bed of the truck, but also inside the cab, faint smears along the upholstery and near the gearshift, as if someone had tried to clean up and failed. The truck itself was registered to Elena Brooks. When officers searched her home later that morning, they found more cleaning supplies stacked haphazardly in the kitchen, a broken lamp, a blood-stained rug rolled up behind the shed. But what shocked them most wasn't the evidence. It was the quiet, methodical way everything had been done. There was no panic, no ruse, almost as if Elena had been preparing for this moment all along. Neighbors were stunned. They described her as sweet, kind, quiet. One woman said Elena used to bring over cookies at Christmas. Another recalled how she always seemed nervous, but polite. No one could imagine her capable of something like this. But as detectives dug deeper, a different picture began to emerge. The 2 men in the truck weren't strangers. They were people from Elena's past. One, identified as Daniel Cross, had dated her years ago. The second, Matthew Hale, was Daniel's close friend. Both had criminal records, minor assaults, disorderly conduct, bar fights. Nothing major, but enough to suggest tempers. According to phone records, both men had been at Elena's house 3 nights before the stop. What happened after that was pieced together through forensics, surveillance, and one chilling confession. Elena eventually spoke. It wasn't right away. It took hours, a quiet room, and Detective Marla Jensen's soft persistence to get her to open up. "It wasn't supposed to happen," Elena finally said, her voice barely audible. "They came to talk. Daniel said he just wanted to see me. But then, they started drinking. Matthew kept pushing, asking questions about money that wasn't even his. I told them to leave. They didn't." She looked down at her cuffed hands. "Daniel hit me. I fell. Everything after that I don't even remember. I just remember the sound." "The sound?" Jensen asked. "The sound of him hitting the floor." Her story, though fractured and confusing, aligned with some of the evidence. There were signs of struggle in the house, overturned chairs, broken glass, blood splatters inconsistent with a single fall. It looked like a fight had erupted, violent and chaotic. When asked why she didn't call the police immediately, Elena only shook her head. "They wouldn't have believed me," she said. "They never do." It wasn't the first time police had been called to her home. Records showed at least 3 prior domestic disturbance reports involving Daniel Cross. In each case, no charges were filed. The reports were brief: verbal dispute, no injuries observed, both parties calm on arrival. Now those old reports painted a devastating picture. The bodies told their own story too. Daniel had a fractured skull, likely from a blunt object. Matthew had been struck multiple times, defensive wounds covering his forearms. Forensic experts suggested that the attacks weren't premeditated, they were impulsive, fueled by panic and rage. Still, the act of loading both bodies into a truck, sealing them in bags, and driving around for days, that was something else entirely. When Jensen asked her about that, Elena's answer sent chills down the detective's spine. "I didn't know where to go," she said softly. "I couldn't just leave them there. I thought maybe, if I drove long enough, it would all stop being real." Her eyes filled with tears for the first time. But it didn't. It just got heavier. The smell, the guilt, everything. She wiped her nose on her sleeve, staring at the table. "When they pulled me over, I didn't even fight. I was tired. Maybe it was supposed to happen that way." In the end, the investigation revealed no sign of anyone else involved. It was just her, one woman, two dead men, and a trail of tragedy that began long before that night on the highway. The DA's office debated the charges, murder or manslaughter. The public wanted answers. News outlets swarmed Brookdale, painting Elena as both villain and victim. But for Carter and Wynn, the memory of that night stayed sharp. The smell, the silence, the pale hand under the torn plastic. Carter once told a reporter months later, "I've pulled over hundreds of cars, written thousands of tickets. But that night, I knew the second she looked at me that something was wrong. I just didn't know how wrong." He paused before adding, "You never forget the sound a world makes when it falls apart." And in that quiet stretch of highway, under a fog that refused to lift, two officers had unknowingly stumbled into the wreckage of a life that had been breaking for years. Elena Brooks didn't try to escape, didn't beg for mercy, didn't even deny what she'd done. She only said one thing as they loaded her into the patrol car that night: they shouldn't have come back. No one knew exactly what she meant, not then. But as the investigation unfolded, it became clear the road to that moment had been paved with fear, silence, and pain that no one ever saw coming. That's how a simple traffic stop became a window into the kind of horror that hides in plain sight, the kind that looks ordinary, even kind, until one night it doesn't. And for the people of Brookdale, it was a night they would never forget. At the station, the air felt thick, heavy with tension and exhaustion. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a pale, almost sickly glow across the cold metal surfaces. Officers moved quietly in and out of the small interrogation room, whispering to one another, unsure what to make of the woman sitting in silence. Elena Brooks sat at the center of it all. Her wrists were cuffed loosely in front of her, resting on the steel table. She hadn't said a word since she was brought in. Her brown hair, once tied neatly behind her head, now fell in loose strands over her face. Every now and then she'd move her fingers across the tabletop, tracing faint, invisible patterns. Circles, lines, then circles again. Almost rhythmic, almost deliberate. Detective Marla Jensen watched her from the observation room through the one-way glass. She'd been on the force for nearly 2 decades. She'd dealt with violent offenders, serial predators, and victims of unimaginable pain. But something about Elena unsettled her in a way few others had. She wasn't angry. She wasn't weeping. She wasn't even defensive. She was still. That kind of stillness didn't come from guilt alone, it came from something deeper. Self or trauma? Or maybe the kind of resignation that comes when someone has lived through something terrible and knows there's no point in running anymore. Jensen finally pushed open the door and stepped inside. She carried 2 cups of coffee, one for herself, one for Elena. She placed it gently in front of her, the steam rising between them like a quiet ghost. "Elena," she began softly, "my name's Detective Jensen. I'm not here to judge you. I just want to understand what happened." No response. Elena's eyes were fixed on the cup as though she couldn't quite process why it was there. Jensen tried again. Those two men in your truck, do you know who they are? For a long time, silence filled the room. Then, barely audible, Elena whispered, they wouldn't stop. Her voice cracked, hoarse, fragile, the sound of someone whose words had been locked away for too long. Jensen leaned forward slightly, not wanting to break the moment. They wouldn't stop what? Elena's gaze lifted slowly, her eyes red and glassy. Hurting me, she said. They just wouldn't stop. Then the silence returned. Jensen could feel the weight of it pressing down on both of them. Over the next several hours, Elena said little else. She refused food, refused sleep. When officers took her fingerprints and photographs, she didn't resist. She just followed instructions like someone on autopilot, aware of what was happening but detached from it. While Jensen was in the room, teams of investigators began tearing apart Elena's life piece by piece. They secured a search warrant for her home, examined her vehicle, and began identifying the victims. The results came back quickly. The first victim was Derek Malone, 39, Elena's former boyfriend. The second was Lucas Reed, 42, a close friend of Derek's. Both men had been reported missing 6 days earlier. They'd last been seen leaving a bar on the outskirts of town, late on a Friday night. Witnesses recalled seeing Derek's blue sedan pull away from the parking lot with Elena sitting in the passenger seat. By the time the reports were compared, the connection was undeniable. When Jensen received the initial crime scene photos from the truck, she had to take a deep breath before flipping through them. The bodies had been wrapped in thick black plastic and sealed with layers of duct tape. Blood had pooled at the bottom of the truck bed, staining the metal. The autopsy report later revealed blunt force trauma as the cause of death for both men, multiple strikes to the skull, likely from a heavy object. And yet, something about the evidence didn't fit the narrative of a cold-blooded killer. The way the bodies were wrapped wasn't clean or methodical, it was frantic, desperate. The knots were uneven, the tape messy. There was no sign of calculated concealment, no bleach, no cleaning agents, no attempt to destroy DNA. It felt like something done in panic, not premeditation. Jensen couldn't shake that thought. When she returned to the interrogation room hours later, Elena was still sitting exactly where she'd been left. Same position, same stare, same silence. The untouched cup of coffee had gone cold. Elena, Jensen began, this time more direct. We know who they are. We know about Derek. We know about Lucas. What we don't know is why. Elena's lips trembled, but no words came out. I've seen your medical records, Jensen continued carefully. There were hospital visits, injuries, broken ribs, bruises. You told doctors you fell down the stairs, but those injuries weren't from stairs, were they? Elena's eyes flickered, her breathing shallow. No one ever listened before, she whispered finally. Not the doctors, not the police. I called once. They said they'd send someone. No one came. Jensen said nothing. She just listened. Sometimes silence was the only way to let someone find their words. He used to come home angry, Elena said softly, staring at her hands. He'd say I made him look stupid, that I talked too much. Sometimes he'd take my phone. Sometimes worse. Lucas would just stand there, laugh, tell me to calm him down before he really lost it. Tears welled in her eyes, but she wiped them away quickly as if ashamed to cry. That night, they came over again. They were drunk. Derek wanted money. Said I owed him. I told him I didn't have any. Then, her voice faltered. He grabbed me. Pushed me. I tried to get away. He kept shouting that no one cared what I said, that no one ever would. She paused, then whispered, I believed him. Jensen watched her closely. What happened next, Elena? Elena's fingers tightened around the edges of the table. He hit me again. I fell. When I got up, I just remember the lamp. The one by the couch? I swung it. I didn't think. I didn't even feel it happen. Then there was blood. Lucas yelled, tried to grab me. I hit him too. Everything went quiet after that. The detective's pen hovered over her notepad, unmoving. This wasn't the confession of a remorseless killer. It was the recounting of a nightmare that had finally burst open. When forensics teams arrived at Elena's home, her story checked out. The living room told a tale of chaos: a broken lamp, overturned furniture, bloodstains on the carpet. The lamp base, cracked and dented, bore traces of Derek's DNA. It was without question the murder weapon. And yet, the most haunting detail wasn't the evidence, it was what came after. Instead of calling 911, Elena had wrapped the bodies, loaded them into her truck, and driven away into the night. She drove for miles, through side roads, back highways, nowhere in particular, just driving, as if trying to escape what she'd done, or maybe what she'd endured for years. Investigators later confirmed that she'd parked at an abandoned gas station for nearly 8 hours, just sitting there with the bodies in the back. No phone calls, no messages, no attempt to run, just silence. Jensen couldn't help but wonder what those hours must have felt like. When the autopsy results came back, they further complicated things. Both men had high levels of alcohol in their systems, more than double the legal limit. Derek's knuckles showed defensive wounds. Lucas had abrasions consistent with restraint, as if he'd been trying to hold someone down. Every new detail painted a picture that blurred the line between victim and perpetrator. The district attorney's office wanted a straightforward case: 2 murders, clear evidence, an easy conviction. But Jensen knew nothing about this was simple. She spent days combing through Elena's background. Old police logs showed multiple 911 calls from her address over the years, all unfiled or marked as resolved. Neighbors recalled hearing yelling late at night. One, an older woman named Mrs. Collier, described seeing Elena outside her house once, barefoot, bruised, crying. "She told me she'd fallen," Mrs. Collier said. But her face, she looked like someone who'd given up trying to be believed. That one statement stayed with Jensen. Back at the station, Elena remained in holding. She'd been appointed a public defender, but she rarely spoke even to him. Every time Jensen walked past the holding cell, Elena's posture was the same: head bowed, hands clasped, eyes vacant. Eventually, Jensen sat with her one last time before the case was officially handed over to the DA. "Elena," she said gently, "you could have called someone. You could have gone to the police. Why didn't you?" Elena lifted her head slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because they never believed me when I did." There it was, the quiet, devastating truth. In the following weeks, the small town buzzed with rumors. Some called her a monster, others called her a victim. The media painted her as both a woman caught between guilt and desperation. The trial preparations dragged on for months. Prosecutors argued it was murder. The defense claimed it was self-defense. Evidence showed the men had been drinking heavily, their aggression escalating throughout the night. Photos of Elena's bruises were submitted. So were her medical records. The timeline supported her story. Still, the public was divided. Detective Jensen was called to testify. She recalled Elena's calm during interrogation, not the calm of indifference, but the numb calm of someone whose world had already collapsed. When she took the stand, Elena spoke softly, barely audible. She didn't try to justify her actions. She didn't cry. She simply said, "I just wanted it to stop." Her words silenced the courtroom. Even the prosecutor paused for a moment before continuing. For all the investigation's technical detail, the blood spatter analysis, the forensic reports, the expert testimonies, it was that one sentence that lingered. "I just wanted it to stop." Jensen later wrote in her report that those 5 words said more about the entire case than anything else. After the trial, Jensen sat alone in her office, replaying every moment of the investigation. The smell of the truck, the quiet of the interrogation room, the way Elena had flinched at sudden noises. There was something about trauma, she thought, that made people invisible long before they disappeared from view. Elena had been invisible for years, until her pain erupted into something no one could ignore. Even now, long after the case was closed, Jensen couldn't shake the image of her tracing those invisible patterns on the table. Circles. Lines. Circles again. As if trying to draw a way out. When the final report was filed, it read like a contradiction. The evidence confirmed 2 homicides, but also clear signs of abuse. The DA pushed for manslaughter instead of murder. The judge agreed. Elena's sentence reflected both accountability and tragedy, years in prison but with acknowledgement of what she'd endured. In the end, the investigation didn't uncover a monster. It uncovered a system that had failed a woman long before she failed herself. Detective Jensen often said later that it was the quietest case she'd ever worked on. No outbursts, no shouting, just silence, heavy and unending. Because some stories don't end with justice or closure. Some end with the haunting truth that pain, when ignored long enough, turns into something irreversible. And though the law had done its part, Jensen knew there were no real winners here, only lessons carved into the lives of everyone involved. Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's just the faint echo of a truth finally spoken after years of silence. And for Elena Brooks, that truth came too late to save anyone, herself included. When prosecutors prepared their case, they expected a cold-blooded killer. To them, Elena Brooks was a woman who had planned everything, who had lured 2 men to her home, murdered them in cold blood, and tried to flee with their bodies in the back of her truck. The evidence, at first glance, seemed undeniable. 2 victims, 1 weapon, 1 suspect. Her fingerprints were everywhere, on the door handles, the tarp, the trash bags. And when police questioned her, she didn't deny what had happened. She simply said it was over too fast. To the prosecution, that sounded like guilt. To the media, it was the perfect headline: waitress turned killer, 2 bodies found in truck. The town of Brookdale devoured the story. People wanted answers, and they wanted a villain. But as the trial began, the defense team started peeling away the layers of Elena's life, and what they found would shatter that simple story of good and evil. Elena's attorney, a seasoned public defender named Rachel O'Neill, stood before the jury on the first day and said just one sentence that changed everything. Before you decide what Elena did, you have to understand what was done to her. That line hung in the courtroom like smoke, and over the next 3 weeks the defense slowly rebuilt the story, not of a killer, but of a survivor who had run out of choices. Elena met her ex-boyfriend, Daniel Reeve, when she was just 23. At first, he was charming, the kind of man who made her feel seen. He'd leave notes in her locker at the diner, bring her flowers after work, and talk about a future together. For a young woman who'd grown up in a quiet, broken home, Daniel's confidence felt like safety. But it didn't take long for that safety to turn into control. Friends testified that Daniel would show up at the diner during her shifts, watching her from the counter, glaring at any man who spoke to her. He'd go through her phone, demand to know where she was every hour. One coworker recalled how Elena started showing up to work with makeup caked under her eyes, not to impress, but to cover the bruises. When the defense showed the first police report, the courtroom went silent. It was dated 5 years before the murders. The report described an incident where Elena had been found outside her home, barefoot and crying, claiming Daniel had lost his temper. But the charges were dropped. Daniel's family had influence in town, and Elena, terrified and dependent, never followed through. That was the first of 4 separate reports, none of which led to conviction. The defense then called her neighbor, Mrs. McKinney, to the stand. An elderly woman with trembling hands, she told the jury how she'd heard screaming, glass breaking, and sometimes silence. The kind of silence that makes you worry someone didn't survive the night. She paused, wiping tears from her face, before whispering, "I called the police 3 times in 1 year, but they said it was a domestic matter." By the time Daniel finally left Elena, she was broken physically and emotionally. But he didn't really leave. He kept showing up. Sometimes late at night, banging on her door. Sometimes sitting in his truck across the street for hours. And then came the second man, his friend Trevor. He'd been around since the beginning. A quiet, brooding presence who seemed to enjoy Daniel's control over her. He was the one who delivered the final threats after Daniel's last arrest. "If you ever tell anyone what happened," he'd said, "you'll regret it." Elena lived every day with fear that they'd come back. She moved houses twice, changed jobs. But she couldn't outrun them. Then on the night of March 14th, they did come back. According to her testimony, it started with a knock on the door just after midnight. Elena didn't answer. She knew that knock, slow, deliberate, and cruel. Then came the shouting, then the pounding. When the door finally gave in, she said she saw Daniel first, drunk, furious, calling her every name imaginable. Trevor stood behind him, holding something shiny in his hand, later identified as a knife. The prosecution argued that Elena invited them in, but forensic evidence told a different story. The door frame was splintered, the hinges broken. There were scuff marks on the floor where someone had been dragged. The struggle lasted less than 3 minutes. But in those 3 minutes, the years of fear, humiliation, and pain finally reached their breaking point. Elena grabbed the kitchen knife from the counter. In the chaos, Daniel lunged first. She swung, once then again. Trevor tried to pull her off him and she turned the blade on him too. By the time it was over, both men were still. The kitchen floor was covered in blood. The defense presented photos taken that night, not the ones the media showed, but the ones taken in the hospital afterward. Elena's wrists were bruised. Her cheekbone was fractured. She'd been punched, bitten, choked. Rachel O'Neal looked at the jury and said this wasn't murder, this was survival. But what happened next was harder for even the defense to explain. Instead of calling the police, Elena sat on the floor for nearly 2 hours. When she finally moved, it wasn't to run or hide. She cleaned the blood off the tiles. She wrapped the bodies. She placed them in trash bags. And then, as the sun began to rise, she put them in the back of her truck, unsure what to do, unsure where to go. Psychologists later testified that trauma can create what's called a dissociative state, a kind of emotional shutdown where the brain detaches from reality. Elena described it as moving in a dream I couldn't wake up from. They started driving aimlessly down old country roads through empty highways. She didn't have a plan. She didn't have an end. She just kept driving until the flashing lights appeared behind her. That's how the police found her. The prosecution painted that drive as guilt. The defense called it panic. And as each day of the trial unfolded, the line between those two blurred more and more. Then came the turning point, a piece of evidence the defense had fought hard to include. An audio recording. Months before the murders, Elena had secretly recorded a conversation between her and Daniel, a last attempt, her lawyer said, to prove his abuse. The courtroom listened in silence. Daniel's voice was low, menacing. "You think anyone will believe you? You think the cops care? You're mine, Lena. Always will be." The recording ended with a slap and Elena's sobs. Even the prosecutor, a man known for his composure, paused before continuing. After that, the tone of the entire case shifted. The jury wasn't looking at a monster anymore. They were looking at a woman who'd been failed by the system, by her neighbors, by everyone who'd seen the signs and done nothing. One of the jurors would later tell reporters, it stopped being about what she did and started being about what she'd lived through. But the law is complicated, and the law doesn't bend easily for sympathy. The prosecution argued that no matter how much pain she'd endured, two men were dead, and Elena had made choices that night. They said she could have called the police, run away, screamed for help. O'Neill countered that she had called the police dozens of times, and every time she was told to work things out. She asked the jury, "How many times can you cry for help before you stop believing anyone will come?" The courtroom was silent. Even the clicking of pens stopped. Then came Elena's testimony, the first time she'd spoken in public about that night. Her voice was fragile, trembling, but steady enough to be heard. "I didn't want to hurt anyone," she said. "I just wanted it to stop. I wanted to breathe again." She described the fear, the years of isolation, the moments when she thought dying might be easier than surviving another day. She talked about how she'd tried to leave, how every time she packed her things, Daniel found her and dragged her back. "I thought if I disappeared, maybe I'd be free," she said. "But he always found me. Always." As she spoke, the jury avoided her eyes. Some scribbled notes, some stared straight ahead. But one woman, juror number 7, wiped tears from her face. The defense rested their case on the argument of battered woman syndrome, a condition recognized in courtrooms as a form of prolonged trauma that can alter a person's perception of danger and self-defense. The psychologist who examined Elena testified that she showed classic symptoms: hypervigilance, chronic fear, and emotional dissociation. She described how women like Elena often act impulsively when they finally fight back, not from rage, but from instinct. The prosecution called it a convenient excuse. The defense called it the truth. When the closing statements came, both sides painted two very different pictures. The prosecutor stood tall, his voice echoing, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, two men are dead. They were sons, brothers, and friends. No matter what happened before that night, their lives were taken, and that cannot be ignored." Then Rachel O'Neill rose slowly, almost whispering. "You're right," she said. "Two men are dead. But what about the woman who died long before that night? What about the years she spent as a prisoner in her own home, crying for help that never came? What about the system that looked away?" She took a step closer to the jury box. "Justice," she said softly, "isn't about punishment. It's about understanding. And if you understand Elena Brooks, then you know she didn't kill out of hate. She acted out of fear. Fear that had haunted her for half her life." The courtroom was still when she finished. Even the judge seemed to take a long breath before calling recess. After 12 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. The verdict wasn't simple. It rarely is. Elena Brooks was found guilty of manslaughter, not murder. The distinction meant everything. It meant the jury believed her story. They believed she hadn't planned it. They believed she'd been pushed too far. When the verdict was read, Elena didn't cry. She just closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you." The judge spoke last, his voice heavy with emotion. "This is one of the most tragic cases I've ever seen," he said. "It is a story of violence creating violence, of a woman failed by the very people meant to protect her." He sentenced her to 20 years in prison, the minimum allowed by law, but with eligibility for parole in 10. As the guards led her away, Elena turned to her lawyer and said quietly, "Maybe now I can finally sleep." Outside the courthouse, the sky was gray. Reporters crowded the steps, microphones raised, asking the same question over and over: was justice served? Detective Jensen, who had led the investigation from day one, stood by her car watching the chaos unfold. "Justice," she said quietly, "depends on where you're standing." For some, it was justice delayed. For others, it was justice redefined. But one thing was clear: Elena's case forced everyone to confront an uncomfortable truth. That sometimes monsters aren't born. They're made slowly, painfully, and with every ignored cry for help. And in that courtroom, beneath the weight of evidence and emotion, the line between victim and killer blurred into something human, something tragic. Because in the end, Elena Brooks' story wasn't just about death. It was about survival, the brutal, desperate kind that leaves scars deeper than any wound. It was about the silence of a system that could have saved her but didn't. And it was about the price a person pays when fear becomes their only language. Elena Brooks was sentenced to 20 years in prison. She didn't cry when the verdict was read. She simply nodded as if she'd known all along that justice, whatever form it took, was finally catching up to her. Outside the courthouse, Detective Jensen stood in the rain, staring at the courthouse steps. She knew there were no real winners in this story, only truth and the quiet weight of what it costs to uncover it. Because sometimes justice doesn't look like victory, it looks like survival. This was another story from True Justice Stories. If this case gripped you like it did us, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real tales where truth meets justice.